Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze. And today we are having our Friday Frontliner segment with Kristin Hannah. I know we're all so excited about this. Hi, Kristin! I just blew out everybody's ears on the podcast. Sorry about that, you guys. So if you are new to The Blaze, please know that we are a team of 30 volunteers, creative professionals who are dedicated to helping writers reach readers in the age of COVID and beyond. And if you like what you see here today, please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can see all of the interviews we have done since March 2020, which is basically like literary history with authors talking about their lives in the pandemic. And you can subscribe to our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com, which means you'll never have literary FOMO ever again because all of our upcoming events are listed in the newsletter. And nobody wants literary FOMO. It is a very dangerous condition. So please sign up for the newsletter. And I have to tell you, you guys, it's our Blaze birthday this week. We are a year old. And I had a sneak preview of what's coming up the next couple of months. And it is like insane, like bat beep, bonkers, bananas, crazy literary goodness. Like seriously, it will blow your mind. So sign up for the newsletter. Don't miss out. Obviously, we are kicking off this bananas literary goodness by hosting Kristin Hannah today. Kristin is the queen of fiction, the queen of historical fiction, literary fiction, commercial fiction, all the fictions. Kristin, if you don't mind, I would love to read your official bio.
If you'd like to, sure.
Okay. Buckle up, everybody. I know
I don't even know what it says.
Kristin, I know. I sort of.
Oh, Susan. Hi, Susan.
I know. I may have done like a couple of, thank you, Susan, a couple of modifications to your bio.
Oh, no.
Hannah used to be a go-go dancer. No, I just, that's not true. Kristin Hannah is the award-winning and mega internationally best-selling author of more than 20 novels, including international blockbusters The Great Alone, The Nightingale, Winter Garden, Night Road, and Firefly Lane. Nightingale has been published in 43 languages and is currently in movie production at TriStar Pictures, which I would love to ask about. It was voted Best Book of the Year by Amazon, BuzzFeed, iTunes, Library Journal, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. And it also won the Goodreads People's Choice Award, which is, I know, highly coveted. The Great Alone, the novel preceding Kristin's newest novel, The Four Winds, has been optioned for film by TriStar as well, and Homefront has been optioned for film by 1492 Films. Today, Kristin is here to introduce to her multitudes of adoring fans, many of you I have seen on Facebook the past couple of weeks, her latest historical fiction tour de force, The Four Winds, which I loved. A saga of one family's journey from the ravaged Dust Bowl of Texas to California. A true tale of, I'm just going to put this down because I'm just going to say like what I think it is. A true tale of American despair, tragedy, courage, and resilience that we all really need right now. To me, it was sort of a mashup of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which I'm sure you've heard a lot, and a really immersive, good, old-fashioned read like The Help, which is one of those books that I took to bed with me because I just couldn't wait to get back to bed every night to read it. A world that draws you in and is so immersive and so accessible, and yet about such an important part of our history. So that is The Four Winds, ta-da, which we love. I'm going to ask that for questions, no spoilers, and I will try hard not to put any spoilers in our chat today because I know many of you are reading and enjoying The Four Winds right now. Four Winds is already a bestseller in like every single conceivably way, like Indie Next and New York Times and Amazon and Goodreads and everywhere you could be a bestseller. The Four Winds is deservedly a bestseller. Kristin, could you please describe for us what you think The Four Winds is about?
Yes, and thank you for inviting me here. This is great. The Four Winds is sort of a continuation of what I've been doing for the last couple of years, which is focusing on historical time periods and historical eras that I think are fascinating and important and seem to have been predominantly from the male perspective sort of for the whole of my life. And so I'm trying to return women to the forefront of these stories. And this story, like you point out, is, set during the Great Depression on the Great Plains. And it's the story of a woman who is, because of circumstance, because of the depression, because of the drought that has hit the Great Plains, is struggling to keep her family alive and together, and ultimately has to decide whether she thinks it's better to stay where they are in really terrible adversity, or to pack up and go west in search of a better life without any knowledge about whether that will come to pass.
That is a beautiful description. Thank you. And that is Elsa, the heroine of The Four Winds, who I thought was just such a wonderful heroine who partakes of these tropes of a woman being known as plain, right? You describe Elsa as plain, or she's described by other people as plain, and she thinks of herself as a sort of an ugly duckling, and yet she finds, despite herself, that she has these great, great reserves of strength. Can you tell us who you based Elsa on? I was looking for a photo of this today, of this person.
Yes, I wish I had a photo with me. So she was actually inspired by a Dorothea Lange photograph from the era, and it's called Woman of the High Plains, and it's this black and white photo of a tall, thin, blonde woman, looking out towards the horizon, and you see sort of despair and fear and strength and resilience and everything in this one photograph. And, and I realized that I just wanted to read that story about that woman. And as an aside, just like, because I know this is a writing community kind of thing, you may have heard that I researched for a year, and then I write for 2 years. That's the way these books are going. And so on this book, I researched for my year. I came up with my story. I sold it to my publisher. I spent a year writing it, and there was no Elsa in the book at all. And so it wasn't until, the top, the second half of this whole process, that Elsa, walked onto the set as a nothing character. And within like a month, I realized that I had to throw away everything that I have and replot and start over.
Okay, that is so fascinating. I remember seeing that mentioned in a couple of previous interviews, but I cannot imagine, as the writer, Elsa is such a maypole for this book. She really grounds the book with all of the winds swirling around her. See what I did there? I cannot imagine this story without her. What did it look like before she was on the stage? Who was telling the story?
This was Loreda's story, and Loreda, 18-year-old girl, and it was Rafe was her father, and it was the family going west, to try to find a better life. And so it just didn't have the gravitas, because the bottom line was, in the context of this story, because it is so powerful and because it's such a look at adversity and resilience, an 18-year-old girl was not doing it for me. I needed a mother-daughter story here. I needed someone trying to save someone else, not someone trying to go forward. And so that's when I just started over and made, Loreda the teenage daughter and Elsa the mother. And then the book really started to fly.
I love it. And Loreda is still a very strong character, voice, and presence in the novel. So we get her perspective, as well as the family experiences, basically that slice of hell in American history known as the Depression and the Dust Bowl and the migration to California and the conditions there, which are shocking. Why the Dust Bowl? Why were you drawn to this time?
Well, for whatever reason, after The Nightingale, which was about 7 years ago, that was my sort of breakout, thank you, into historical fiction. And, in that time period, you remember this, I know, because this is sort of pre-social media. And so like before The Nightingale came out, and that, you didn't know what everyone in the world thought of your books. And when you went on book tour, nobody had read it, because it was always brand new. And so I didn't always hear as much on my previous books as I heard on The Nightingale. And so anyway, I saw how The Nightingale was being embraced by women. And it made me want to write an American Nightingale. I wanted to write an epic that had the resonance and the power and was this portrait of female courage. But I wanted it to be about, my country and, the people I knew and family members and that. And so I just went, for a search into history of what period did I believe women had been underrepresented, and yet clearly had to be courageous to survive. And, my first stop was the Great Depression. And once you get to the Great Depression, which, by the way, I knew very little about, I'm sorry to say, I knew almost nothing about the Dust Bowl. And so when I started reading about the Dust Bowl, I was just blown away by the level of adversity and by the climate change issue, the environmental damage issue. All of these things just felt suddenly very relevant to me. And I guess that's it. So I picked those periods, and from then on, once you pick the Dust Bowl, the journey west is sort of the natural extension of that. And all I really knew about that was the Grapes of Wrath. And so, which, is a very masculine piece. And so that sort of is how it all got started.
So many questions, so many things I can unpack there. I love it. Thank you. I'm wondering, did you have other choices that you were considering for your great American epic? It's such a brave thing to think, okay, I need something on a scale with World War II. So many of us love the
Nightingale. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yes, without doing, I've done World War II twice, and I know I hadn't done, the home front, but I didn't really want to. And so, and I didn't really want to go back into, corsets and hoop skirts. So there was sort of a valley of time that I was interested in. And it felt like when I started this 4 years ago, one thing we were very clear about in this country was there was great political division. And, we're facing a lot of issues with immigration, a lot of issues with the haves and the have-nots. And so when I went to the Great Depression, it was very much, these are lessons that are relevant now. Even 4 years ago, they felt relevant. And I'm always looking for this idea of, learning from history, reminding people that we have been someplace before. That was one of the things that I thought Nightingale did unexpectedly too. And I think a lot of this World War fiction does.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. As somebody who writes World War II fiction, I think also people are comforted by the idea that there's an absolute good versus absolute evil, which in World War II was maybe one of the last moments in history we saw this, like Nazis bad, everybody else good, So I think people like having that polarity to believe in, but polarity right now is also tearing us apart. What lesson maybe surprised you while you were writing The Four Winds? Did you learn anything that shocked you about our history?
Yeah, what surprised me probably the most, I mean, there were several surprises along the way. I've got two stories for that. So what surprised me the very most was when I did this research into the Dust Bowl, which is, this the Great Plains, the center of the country, and this drought that went on for 4 years, and the Dust Bowl. For people who haven't read it yet, it was just this, Herculean badness, coming through, right? And the shocking thing to me was the vast majority of those farmers and families stayed on that land.
Mm.
They loved their land so much. Many of them were immigrants who had come here and put down roots, and they just believed so deeply in the American dream and in their pursuit of it that they were not going anywhere. And so every day they woke up saying, well, when it rains, we'll be fine, and believing in a better tomorrow. And I think it's that, that's the resilience and grit that we ascribe to the greatest generation that we can all sort of admire and learn from. Mm-hmm. So there was that. And then there was this amazing story about the California section of the book that really surprised me. I don't know if you've heard this yet, but so when I was doing the migrant workers in California, I came across a woman named Sonora Babb, who was a Texan, and she was like 30 years old, and she worked in the camps, and her job was to interview the people who were in the camps to find out what they needed, what was going well, what was not going well. She was, so she wrote these notes out every day. She, at the same time, was writing her great American novel about the migrant experience in California, which she was a part of because she had grown up in the Dust Bowl. And so unbeknownst to her, she is giving these notes to her boss, who is giving them to John Steinbeck, while he is writing The Grapes of Wrath. Yes. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
So she sells her book, I think it's 1937, sells her book to the great Bennett Cerf at Random House. He tells her this is going to be the great American novel. He flies her to New York. They begin editing her novel. And just before it's done, The Grapes of Wrath comes out. And he tells her, you are now unpublishable.
Oh my God. Yeah. I really have to fan myself. For those of you listening to the podcast, this is every writer's nightmare. And I feel as though, particularly for a female writer at that time, it would not have been an easy aspiration to hit, to be told you're going to.
And I believe the book, I should know it. I believe the book was published in like 1997.
That's a long time to wait.
That's a long time to wait.
That's a really, really long time. I hope wherever Sonora is, she sees it.
I keep pitching it so that maybe, she'll sell. And of course, the really interesting thing as a writer is these two novels couldn't be more different. I mean, his is an epic, thing, and hers is an intimate look at a woman's story, so they're very different stories. And it's just, you asked me what surprised me. That surprised me.
That is such a woman behind the man's world story. And I'm so glad that you're giving Sonora Babb her shout out, and happy International Women's Day, by the way, a couple of days later. I feel like your experience, her experience, this book plants such a flag for women's rights and women's experience, saying we were here, we were in the middle of history as well. And I think it's so important to think what women see and what they experience that may not have been given a voice before this.
Well, and I'm sure that you learned in all of your World War II, research. One thing I learned with the Nightingales certainly was that the women came home and didn't talk about these things. They did not pass these stories on and write about them the way that men did. And I think it's so important. All of these World War II stories, is giving women a voice during this time period.
Absolutely. I think the women talked about it with each other, and the men put it out into the world because they tended to be more listened to by other men who had the power. One of the things that I loved about The Four Winds was this very tender female friendship that Elsa forms with another woman in one of the migrant camps. And when I say migrant camps, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, we're not talking about migrants from other countries. We're talking about migrants of Americans from within America to another part of America, from the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas to California, because that was where the agricultural work was. So the camps were just unbelievably fulsome, unbelievably difficult conditions. And I did not know as much about that as I knew about the Dust Bowl. So I would love to sort of rope you back and ask you to describe first the Dust Bowl and how cray cray that eco disaster was. Like, what did that look like for people? What did it feel like? And then to describe the camps, if you would.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the Dust Bowl is still the greatest environmental disaster in American history on American soil, no pun intended. And what's interesting to me about it is that it was partially man-made. It was partially a response to farming methods, not that they knew this, right? But so what happened was that World War I hit and we needed wheat, and there was that whole "wheat will win the war" slogan. And so everybody in the Great Plains just ripped up all the buffalo grass and planted more and more and more wheat and corn so that they could be the breadbasket. But they did this without irrigation. It's what's called dry farming. And essentially this can be a desert area. So when in the Great Depression crashed all of the prices, so now the wheat isn't worth as much. And then, the drought hits, and this was a 4-year drought where they had, something like 6 or 7 inches of rain a year. And when the drought hit, the windstorms came through, and there was no root system to hold the dirt in place. So winds would blow at 40 miles an hour for 11, 12, 13 days in a row. And one of my statistics I love so much was on Black Sunday, which was April 14th, 1935. The amount of dust that was lifted up in one day's dust storm was the amount of dirt taken out of the Panama Canal. And it fell as far as Washington, D.C. And so, they had to drive with their, headlights on, and you couldn't see, and people got what's called dust pneumonia because they were breathing in so much dust. So it was just a brutal time. And the fact that these Americans stuck it out, to me, is just miraculous.
I have, if you would permit me, some friends who are watching who I got to know fairly well while I was researching my second book, The Storm Chasers, on the Oklahoma Panhandle. And this is a place, for those of you who haven't been there, where the locals say if you stand anywhere on the Panhandle, you can see for 50 miles. And if you stand on a tuna can, you can see 100 miles. Like, it is flat. And the people are just tough as boots because they had to survive the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, but also they are plagued by tornado, like the worst tornadoes we have in this country are there. And so many of them are third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation Oklahomans, Texans, and Kansans, all in this very narrow place that was really plagued by so many natural and man-made disasters. And I know many of them are watching, so I just want to say you guys are amazing. And I know you have a great sense of place, as Kristin was talking about, and a great sense of pride in that heritage of sticking it out. When I was reading the book, too, I did such a deep dive, Kristin. I hope that I knew about this because I know my friends there. I have another friend who's working on a novel called If It Rains that was, describing the mantra of every farmer, every week on the plains at that time. But I revisited my pictures of what Black Sunday looked like because I still could not believe my eyes. And if you Google Black Sunday, you will see it looks literally like a tsunami that is several skyscrapers high, rolling toward these tiny houses. And the fact that people survived it and that they stayed is unbelievable. Can you talk a little bit about maybe why people stayed for so long? Maybe besides that sense of place, did they just not have anywhere else to go because it was the Depression?
Well, I think you always have some place to go, in the sense that there were a lot of people who walked west. There were people who walked west pushing, baby strollers and riding on bicycles, if things get bad enough. And I think the big difference was a lot of the migrants came from the agricultural South, which had the sharecropping kind of thing, where they didn't own the land, versus I think, in the Great Plains, a lot of those people did own the land. They'd homesteaded, during homestead time and all that. And I think people came to America, this American dream of land ownership, that you could own this land and you could pass it along to your children. And I think that was just so powerful that they refused to give it up.
You really embody this in Elsa, who has such a sense of not belonging in her own family. And then when she finds a family, she finds her home, she finds a place on the plains in Texas, and then is hit by this cataclysm. She doesn't want to leave because she belongs. She belongs there. Yeah. One of the things I loved about The Four Winds is the sort of internal physical granularity of living through this experience. I think women heroines in fiction do this so well. They experience everything on this internal, physical, just getting through it level. Like, what does this feel like? So you really bring this to life for us in this very intimate way. What I did not know, and what was fascinating to me, was the experience in California for these people who finally said, I can't stay here. My children are dying. We have to hit the road. We have to go. I mean, Elsa gets in a car and drives out there. And I just, I drive in a car chasing tornadoes. It was not half as terrifying as the things that she goes through on that migration, and how dangerous it was, with people with guns along the way, desperate, hungry people. Can you talk about the journey and then about the camps that she finds her place in?
Well, you're looking at a time period in history where 12 million people are out of work, where the desperation is epic. And now we have, in my story, we take a woman who actually does not believe that she has the ability to be brave, to be courageous, to save her children, because she's been told and she has internalized that she is weak or broken in some way. And yet she does what parents do. They get on with it. They do what needs to be done. They fight the next dragon and the next one. And through the course of all of this hardship, what it does to Elsa, of course, is allow her to find her voice. Because you know how we always say, like in raising children, if you want your child to be confident, let them fail, pick themselves back up, and succeed. And so she's, is this continually stumbling and getting back up, and begins to see herself as a strong person. And she ultimately gets to a point where this voice that she has found within herself is strong enough, not just to be a mother, not just to be a friend, not just to be, a woman, but to fight for the disenfranchised, the downtrodden, people who are too afraid to speak for themselves. And to me, that's like true heroism. And so she comes to that moment, and she comes to that moment largely because the Dust Bowl is bad. The Dust Bowl is man against nature. When she gets to California, she is fighting other Americans. She's fighting for her place in this new world where she believed that she was going to be welcomed, and that she believed she was going to find a job. And, it's just another moment in history where the haves and the have-nots are just, locked in an epic battle. And this is sort of the rise of unionism, where we begin to say, you have to treat your workers in a certain way. We have to be a certain kind of country. So
there's just so much bravery in that. Elsa has a family legacy of bravery also, where she has a grandfather who's a Texas Ranger, right? And he gives her this mantra. Would you share that with your audience?
Well, her grandfather was a Texas Ranger, and gave her this great sense of pride in being Texan. And he talks to her at great length about courage, and that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is, going forward when you are afraid. And she really learns that lesson as she's going forward.
What a great lesson for us all to remember right now, when we've had such a tough year. So many people have had just staggering losses. And I found The Four Winds very comforting to read for that reason. As you said, to be reminded that Americans have gone through really tough things before. And in a way, I felt a little bit ashamed too, because I thought what is being asked of us right now is to stay home, to wear masks, and to watch Netflix instead of to, eat dirt and then live in a migrant camp that gets swept away by a flood, and then stand up for, just to give everything you have and to get up every day simply to try and find a job to make a decent living. This book taught me so much about the migrant camps, and also about unionizing. Like when you read this novel, you will never think about unions again in the same way. It just was astonishing. I wanted to ask too, what is the commonality between the Four Winds and, for instance, the Nightingale? When you were talking about people walking across the land with baby strollers and, on foot, I thought, wow, that's so reminiscent of refugees during World War II, just trying to walk from one country to another, carrying like bird cages and family heirlooms. Yeah. Do you feel like this was familiar territory to you? Do you have sort of a preference for one over the other?
For the novels, you mean?
Yeah.
I hadn't really put those two things together, exactly. But I think it comes down to, who I am at my core and what I believe in. And, both novels are about people, women particularly, getting to a point in their life where they must decide that they are ready to risk their lives. They simply have to do that to save their children. And, that was the big question in The Nightingale. I had two characters. Isabel was the young girl who went off and it was easy for her. I'm 18. I'm just going to go be a hero. Right. But for Vian, who had children, had a daughter, that it's a whole different dynamic. At what point do I risk my child's life? At what point do I do something that is so dangerous that we may both end up, in trouble? And I think it's the same kind of thing. Elsa's in that moment here. She ultimately has to decide, when is she willing to go off on her own, and when is life so bad where she is that she must try that.
I have asked myself that question in the past 4.5 years. Like, when do you get to a point that's bad enough that you leave the place that you love, the place that is familiar, even if circumstances are starting to really frighten you? Like, when is that jumping off point? And when you read and write books and you read the history, you think, oh, that's obviously the point. Like right before Crystal knocked, or you just had Black Sunday, things are not going to get better. Go now. When you're living, it seems much more difficult. Would you share with us, did you ever have a sort of a watershed situation in your life that required you to make that kind of really difficult decision?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I come from, and I think this is part of why I was so interested in the Four Winds and in Texas and, in the Martinelli family. I come from a family of adventurers. We are the people who don't wait for it to get bad. We just go in search of something, whatever that is. And we continue to be that way. So I don't have a generational home or a place that we have lived for generations or any of that kind of deep connection to place. And I find that very romantic. And so I think that was part of my inspiration.
Do you have a place now that you consider to be a home that feels like a home? I know that you also are a sort of a endless pioneer.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I have lived in the Seattle area now for a very long time, and I love it. But, if my husband came home and said, hey, we're going to Paris, I would say, okay, we're going to Paris. I'm packing up, or Saskatchewan, whatever it is. I'm much more of, I don't know, an adventurer, I guess, than a settler.
I was going to say, if anybody's husband comes home and says we're going to Paris, we're all like,
that's
okay.
True.
Do we have to? Okay. But it kind of reminds me a little, I have a pioneering strain in my family as well. My mom's people were pioneers who, as I mentioned before, settled in the plains. And I feel sometimes like Pa Ingalls, who, when he could see the smoke coming from a neighbor's chimney, would say, no, it's too close. We have to move on. And that sort of doing the thing that nobody else is doing really beckons to me often as well. So it's like a constant push-pull between love of community, which I love greatly, and then, well, what is out there? What is that thing over there?
Right.
I think in your fiction too, you seem to be pioneering. You wrote a certain genre of books for many years and now took the deep dive into historical fiction, and you have readers who worship your books no matter what you're writing. Do you have a preference? Do you think you'll stay in historical fiction?
I doubt it. I mean, it's interesting how one's own patterns become sort of apparent in retrospect. So what I have learned in the last few years is that roughly every 7 years I reinvent myself. And so the first time I reinvented myself was a book called On Mystic Lake, which was a foray into a kind of fiction that didn't exist at the time. And, you know, now it's everywhere, but it didn't exist at the time. 7 years after that, I wrote Firefly Lane, and sort of broke into big women's fiction that covered a lot of time. 7 years later, I wrote The Nightingale. So at some point, I'm sure I will decide to write something that that absolutely terrifies me instead of just scares me.
And that feels better as the writer? Like, that's how you know, okay, this is the thing I should be working on.
You know what? I think maybe, I mean, I've never thought this before, but maybe this is part of the adventurer thing. Maybe I don't ever like to be settled in any one place. You know, I just need to try something else.
We were talking about this a little bit in the green room, you guys, about getting typecast as an author, which in a sense is a great homage, because, you know, people have loved what you've done enough that they want you to keep writing it. But at the same time, you don't want to reheat your leftovers. And I think emotionally, especially, it feels to me incumbent to write something new every time, or I'm not going to be interested. And if I'm not interested, then how is my reader going to be interested?
You know, it's a tough line to walk, because first of all, publishers want you to write what you've written that is working, and readers like to know what they can expect from you. So there has to be generally some through line that, you know, makes readers feel like, oh, well, I'll read it, a contemporary or historical, but it all feels somehow of a piece. And yet, if you don't, I think, blow the doors off every now and again, you get tired yourself.
I can't wait to see what you do next. Maybe you can wait. I'm going to open up the floor to audience questions. I'm sure there are many, many, but I wanted to ask one other question, which I get asked a lot at readings too, like, where do your ideas come from? I know it's hard to answer, at least it is for me, but do you set out thinking, oh, I want to write about this or that, or does something land on you like a meteorite and you think, oh, okay, this is the thing?
Okay, I've never had a meteorite. I wish I had. That would be really great. Ideas are the hardest part for me. It takes me a long time to figure out what I want to write. And I would say that it's usually an issue or a theme or a social issue or something in history. It's rarely do I just walk into an idea. I did actually in The Nightingale. About, I don't know, whenever it was, years ago, when I was writing a book called Winter Garden, set in World War II Russia. I read about André Dujon, the Belgian woman who was one of the first to help downed airmen out of France and over the Pyrenees. And I just thought, how on earth do I not know this story? This is a 19-year-old girl walking over the Pyrenees in espadrilles. And, you know, how do I not know this? And so The Nightingale came to me like that. Most of them, it's just a magpie search for shiny things.
I love that. That's kind of like a meteorite, I think. That's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had one meteorite land on me once and it was very inconvenient because I was finishing a short story collection, and I wrote a short story to round out the collection, and then woke up one morning with this whole novel in my head built around the story. And I thought, oh, not now. I'm about to send out like next week, and then it took me 3 more years to finish the book, but it became my first book. So not a complaint, but it was a very weird. I love those moments where you put your hands on the wheel of something and you just get that kind of shock from it and think, oh, this is the story that I need to tell next. It's just the best, most maniacal.
That is
feeling.
a wonderful feeling when you get it. Definitely.
Really good. Okay. So I know we have audience questions for Kristin, and I would like to invite our producers to pop them up on the screen. So don't be shy. Ask questions. No spoilers, please. And while, I saw a question and it winked out, but there it is again. Okay. Who in your life was the most heroic person and how did they inspire you? What a great question, Tom.
Very great question. I'm going to go with my mom. And she, I lost her very young. I was 24 when she passed away from breast cancer. And she's really the one who taught me how to live, how to die, how to do everything in between. And the first one who put me on the path to writing. And she was, she's in all my books somehow.
I will light a candle for her. I lost my mom to breast cancer as well, but older, but that's a hard thing. So yeah, it's a commonality. And now I find her sort of haunting my work much more than before. Yep. When she was alive, she would say, why does the mom have to be dead in the book? Why can't she just be on a cruise? And now she's going to be in every book. Oh, great question from Amy Sunray, who I love. Amy is a bookseller at Tatnook Bookstore here in Massachusetts, which I miss desperately and can't wait to revisit in person. For Jenna and Kristin, what are your favorite books of 2021 so far? No brainer for me. Yeah, everybody read it.
Let's see. I just read, have you read We Begin at the End, Jenna? That's he's not a debut author, but it's close. His name is Chris Whitaker.
Yes.
Like that very much. I just discovered William Kent Kruger this year. And speaking of Minnesota, and he has captured me. I just read his new book, Lightning Strike. So those are the two that come to mind at the moment. How about you?
Besides your book, I have a lot of books that are coming up, like The Woman with the Blue Star by Pam Jenoff.
Yes.
I literally got in the mail yesterday. I was so excited. I'm trying to think, what else have I read that is so fantastic? Because I read all the time for Blaze. Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson, who actually is a Blazer. It's her debut. It's like this very beautiful sort of unpeeling about race in our culture and what it means to be a Black woman and a impoverished white boy, and it's really, really good. And now I'm looking over at my ottoman where my huge TBR stack is.
Yes.
I'm trying to sneakily look over to remember. I will pop up all my books online, you guys. I'll put them on the Blaze site and also on my Facebook page so you can see what I'm reading. So Anissa is one of our Anissa is one of our like most faithful people ever. Like if we do an interview without her, I think she's dead. Like she's so great. Is there a magical point during your research you have enough for a book, or is it an ongoing process? This is her favorite book of yours, by the way. So
thank you. Thank you. For me, there is a magical moment. And it's when I know the end. So when I can sit down and write a synopsis that usually a synopsis for me is about 12 pages, and it sort of is the whole book and most of the characters as I see it at that moment. And what makes me throw away a synopsis and months of research more than anything else is I don't find an organic ending before I begin. So that's when I know I've got the book in my head.
Do you always know the last line before you start writing?
But I usually know the last scene.
That's so great. And then you just write toward the last scene and you finally get there and you're like, oh, thank God.
Well, that would be super cool. But what actually happens is I write a completely different book. And, from the one that I have envisioned, but it still somehow has the same arc. So what it is I know what I have to say, but characters and plot are fluid for me. I change them all the time. So
I think that's true for everybody. I am a manic outliner, and I insist that everybody in my novel workshop write outlines, but it's mostly just a tool to know how much you know and how much you don't know. And then I have 11 or 12 outlines for every book. So it's not as though you're chiseling it in a stone tablet. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I am a plotter. But I'm a little free-spirited. I mean, what I found with outlining I do a lot of. I don't do a lot of like character bios and that kind of stuff, because I found that I just put too much in. I put in so much more than I needed. And so I try not to do that so much anymore.
I just had this conversation literally this morning with one of my novel workshop people who was saying, I think I put too much in the scene. And I said, well, it's better to have the overstuffed chair and then like take some of this out a little bit instead of having to like invent it all at the last minute. Are you, hi, Tori. Tori is one of our novelists as well. She had a debut out this year called The Last Wish of Millicent Glenn, which was great. That's one of the best books of 2020. Are your first lines instant inspirations or worked over? She loves them. What a great question.
That is a great question, Tori. They are massively worked over, and they usually don't come into existence until I've finished at least 3 or 4 drafts of the book.
Okay, I just saw like one of my producers behind the scenes just did this like hats off, hurrah movement when you said that. I feel as though the beginnings of the books are almost always written or rewritten last. Do you find that to be true?
I do. Yeah. Because I mean, it's what matters most, the first page and the last page. And so, the first page, I try really, really hard to both hook you and tell you where the novel's going and set time and place. And that's a lot to do in an opening paragraph or two. And then the ending, should, is it Aristotle who said that it should feel both inevitable and surprising? And so I work very hard at that as well.
Beautiful. Do you have, sorry, Lori, I just want to ask a question. Do you have stuff up on your walls when you're writing? Like, do you have quotes on the wall? You don't do the crazy, Jack Torrance thing that I do?
Nope.
All work and no play.
I love Jack Torrance. Nope. It's interesting, and I'm getting older now, but I have a really good ability to keep everything in my head. So we'll see if that continues to go as I get older and older.
Oh, I just do it because it is fun, I guess. I like write a line and put it on the wall on a Post-it or a napkin or whatever. And when I have put it safely in the book, then I take it down and put it in a special folder. And then I feel very satisfied. But I remember I wrote one book in a motel, and I had the whole room papered with, and the poor woman who came in to clean, the housekeeping staff, they must have thought I was Jack Torrance. Yeah. They were really scared of me, which, had its advantages. Okay, Lori, I'm sorry I stepped on your question. May we have Lori's question again, please? I don't actually know where it went. It went into the ether.
I saw it. What was it?
I did. I know it was there. She is. Future writer, what career would you have had? What a great question. Worth waiting for. Thank you, Lori.
Well, I was a lawyer before this. And I will say that the only career that I think would be as cool and as fun as being a writer is being a Supreme Court justice. So that would be my other dream career.
It's good that you aim so low.
I know.
Best-selling novelist of the universe, Supreme Court justice. But why wouldn't you? Go big or go home, right? If you're going to have a dream, it might as well.
It's a dream. Yeah, that's what I'm going for.
Well, you have achieved a lot of dreams. I think we have time maybe for like 1 or 2 more questions, and then I will ask my last nosy question. What a great question from Leslie. Do you make a visual map, especially with historical things?
Hi, Leslie. No, I do not make a visual map, and it is an extreme failing. And every time I finish a book, I vow to make a visual map the next time, and then I fail to do it. What I do, and you might find this interesting, Jenna, I write essentially a historical draft first. So it is a draft of everything that is in time and place when it needs to be and where it needs to be. That is the scenes, the places, the events, everything, historically accurate. And when that is done, then I go back and do the characters and the book. And so I have everything in place. And then my job is to make the characters real, because I find that one of the problems sometimes in historical fiction is it's historical heavy and character light. Mm-hmm. And I want it to be, character heavy as much as historically accurate.
Mm-hmm. I had a reader once say about my first book, Blum keeps her eyes on the people in this story. And I was so grateful, because that's exactly what I was aspiring to do, was hide the as you know, Bob draft, which is the characters.
Exactly. Yes.
Research data, as you know, Bob, people walked out of Paris with baby strollers.
That's right.
World War II. And you think, no, that somehow that doesn't quite seem organic. Okay, so I have a question for you. I guess it's, now that you have achieved so much, you have all of these wonderful bestsellers of many different stripes. You have books in production to become films. You have a career that you love. You're always looking for the next wonderful adventure in fiction and in life. When you were starting out as a baby writer, like just making that migration over from being an attorney to being an author, what would you tell that young writer now about what your life has become?
I guess it's interesting. And, people assume that my life is radically different now because there's this circus around it. There's the Netflix show, and there's the movie, and there's the books, and, there's bestseller stuff. So there's all this stuff going on that is very visible. Mm-hmm. And people see it, and it's out on social media. But 353 days a year, my life is the same now as it was when I was that young writer. I mean, yes, I was juggling young motherhood, and then I was juggling teenage years, and then I was juggling the college years, and now I'm in control of my schedule. But it is still that same love of story that wakes me up in the morning, that, keeps me going. It's this idea that every time, like right now, I finished
our broadcast is frozen. Oh no.
Are we there?
Oh, you're here. I can hear you. Okay, good. Oh, you unfroze. I was like, and you're like, and The Secret to Life by Kristin Hannah is?
Well, no, I was just saying that even now, I constantly wonder if I can do it again. It's always climbing a new mountain. It's always a challenge. It's always exciting. I always fear I'm going to fail and hope that I'm going to succeed. And, that's what writing does for me. It sort of creatively and emotionally fills me up. And that's the key to me. It's not about whether how successful or how unsuccessful. So I guess what I would say to that girl is, don't give up. You can always reinvent yourself. You can always, because back then I wanted to get to, not this place, I never even imagined this, but I wanted to get to a place that didn't seem possible. And now I would say to that girl, everything's possible. Just keep fighting for it.
I'm literally sitting on the edge of my chair, completely wrapped. I feel so moved and inspired by that. Thank you so much. Now we all know, those of us who've been privileged to talk with you today and to listen to you today, we know that not only are you an internationally best-selling novelist, but you're also a daily pioneer. And we cannot thank you enough for joining us, bring your beautiful pioneering spirit to us this afternoon. Thank you so much. And congratulations on your success, and enjoy all your adventures.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. I loved your questions, and I love talking to you, Jenna.
Oh, it's truly a pleasure. Truly a pleasure. Thank you so much, Kristin. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on The Blaze, and be well and read lots of good books. Bye. Bye.